Part 1. Introduction. The book opens with a powerful premise. The greatest obstacle to our growth is not the world outside, but the mountain within us. This mountain represents self-sabotage, our unconscious patterns, fears, habits, and emotional wounds that quietly block progress, happiness, and fulfillment. While many people believe success is held back by lack of opportunity, resources, or luck, the author argues that most limitations are internal and self-created. Self-sabotage does not always appear as failure. Often it disguises itself as perfectionism, procrastination, fear of success, fear of change, people-pleasing, emotional avoidance, or staying in comfort zones that no longer serve us. These patterns are not signs of weakness. Rather, they are learned survival mechanisms formed in response to past experiences, trauma, or unmet emotional needs. The book emphasizes that understanding this truth is the first step toward real transformation. The introduction reframes pain and discomfort as signals, not enemies. Emotional resistance, anxiety, and dissatisfaction are messages pointing toward areas of growth that require attention. Instead of numbing these feelings or running from them, the author encourages readers to listen closely. Growth, the book asserts, begins when we stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" A key idea introduced early is that change does not happen by force, but through awareness and emotional intelligence. Willpower alone is rarely enough to overcome deep-rooted habits. Sustainable change happens when we understand the root cause of our behaviors and replace unconscious reactions with conscious choices. The mountain is climbed not by aggression, but by patience, honesty, and self-responsibility. The introduction also challenges the idea that happiness lies in future achievements. Many people believe they will finally feel complete once they reach a certain milestone: money, status, relationships, or validation. The book counters this by explaining that inner alignment must come before external success. Without inner stability, achievements often feel empty or short-lived. Ultimately, Part 1 sets the tone for the entire book. This is not a guide to becoming someone new, but a process of unbecoming what no longer aligns with who you truly are. The journey ahead is one of self-awareness, emotional maturity, and intentional growth. By accepting responsibility for the internal mountain, readers are empowered to transform their lives from the inside out. Part 2. Understanding self-sabotage. This section dives deep into what self-sabotage actually is and why it exists. Rather than portraying self-sabotaging behavior as laziness, lack of discipline, or character flaws, the book reframes it as a form of self-protection. Every habit, even the destructive ones, once served a purpose. Self-sabotage develops when the mind associates certain outcomes, success, visibility, intimacy, change, with emotional risk. If earlier experiences taught you that being seen led to criticism, that trusting others led to betrayal, or that trying hard led to disappointment, your subconscious learns to avoid those states altogether. The result is a quiet internal resistance whenever you approach growth. The book explains that your subconscious mind prioritizes familiarity over happiness. What feels normal will always feel safer than what feels better. This is why people often return to unhealthy relationships, repeat financial mistakes, or abandon goals just as progress begins. It's not because they don't want success. It's because success feels unfamiliar and therefore unsafe. A major concept introduced here is the idea of emotional set points. Everyone has a baseline level of happiness, stress, love, and success they unconsciously believe they deserve. When life begins to exceed this internal threshold, self-sabotage kicks in to restore balance. You might procrastinate, pick unnecessary fights, lose focus, or create chaos. Anything to return to what feels known. The book also highlights how identity plays a powerful role. People often cling to identities shaped by their past. I'm the struggling one. I'm not good with money. Success isn't for people like me. Even positive change can feel like a threat when it contradicts a long-held identity. Letting go of old patterns means letting go of the version of yourself that survived difficult times, and that can feel like a loss, even if the future version is healthier. Another important theme is emotional avoidance. Many self-sabotaging behaviors, overworking, scrolling endlessly, overeating, numbing with distractions, exist to avoid uncomfortable emotions. The book emphasizes that emotions don't disappear when ignored. They accumulate and manifest as anxiety, burnout, or destructive habits. Growth requires emotional literacy, the ability to feel without reacting. The author also distinguishes between external goals and internal readiness. You can plan, visualize, and work hard, but if your emotional foundation is misaligned, progress will feel exhausting or unstable. This explains why some people achieve goals yet feel empty, while others give up just before breakthroughs. The work must happen internally before it can sustain itself externally. A powerful takeaway from this section is that self-awareness is more important than self-control. Trying to fix behavior without understanding its origin leads to cycles of guilt and relapse. When you observe your patterns without judgment, they begin to loosen their grip. Awareness interrupts autopilot. Part 2 ultimately delivers a liberating message. Nothing about you is broken. Your habits are not enemies. They are signals. When you stop fighting yourself and start understanding yourself, change becomes possible. The mountain is not an obstacle placed in your way. It is a guide showing you exactly where healing and growth are required. Part 3 Emotional Healing and Self-Awareness. This section focuses on the foundation of lasting change, emotional healing, and deep self-awareness. The book makes a clear distinction between managing symptoms and addressing root causes. Many people try to change their lives by adjusting routines, setting goals, or forcing discipline. But without healing unresolved emotional patterns, these efforts often collapse under pressure. The author explains that unprocessed emotions do not disappear, they wait. They resurface through triggers, overreactions, anxiety, or chronic dissatisfaction. Emotional healing begins when we stop labeling feelings as good or bad, and instead see them as data. Every emotion carries information about unmet needs, boundaries, or beliefs that require attention. A major idea here is the concept of emotional responsibility. While our pain may not be our fault, our healing is our responsibility. Blaming circumstances, people, or the past keeps us stuck in reaction mode. Healing begins when we reclaim authorship over our inner world. This does not mean suppressing feelings, but allowing them to be felt, understood, and released. The book emphasizes radical self-honesty. Growth requires acknowledging uncomfortable truths, where we are afraid, where we are avoiding change, and where we are complicit in our own stagnation. Many people unconsciously romanticize their suffering because it feels familiar. Letting go of pain can feel like letting go of identity. Awareness disrupts this attachment. Another key theme is reparenting the self. The behaviors we struggle with as adults often stem from unmet emotional needs in childhood. Safety, validation, love, consistency. When these needs were not met, we learned to meet them in unhealthy ways. Healing means learning to provide these needs for ourselves through boundaries, self-trust, and emotional regulation. The author also introduces the idea of trigger work. Triggers are not random. They reveal where healing is needed. Instead of reacting defensively, the book encourages readers to pause and ask, what belief is being activated? What fear is underneath this reaction? What does this moment remind me of? This shift transforms everyday discomfort into opportunities for growth. Triggers stop being threats and start becoming teachers. A significant portion of this section addresses self-trust. Many people sabotage progress because they don't trust themselves to handle success, conflict, or uncertainty. This lack of trust often comes from broken promises to oneself, starting and quitting, knowing better, but choosing worse. Rebuilding self-trust requires small, consistent acts of integrity, not dramatic life overhauls. The book also discusses emotional boundaries. Without boundaries, people absorb others' expectations, moods, and opinions, losing clarity about their own desires. This leads to people-pleasing, resentment, and burnout. Healing involves learning where you end and others begin. Part 3 reinforces a crucial truth. Awareness precedes transformation. You cannot outgrow what you refuse to face. When emotions are met with compassion instead of resistance, they naturally soften. The mountain within begins to shrink, not because it is conquered, but because it is understood. Part 4. Identity, Beliefs, and Rewiring the Self. This section explores how identity and belief systems shape behavior, often more powerfully than motivation or intention. The book explains that most people do not fail because they lack desire, but because they are trying to build a new life on an old self-image. Until identity changes, behavior will always snap back to familiar patterns. At the core of this discussion is the idea that beliefs are not facts. They are learned interpretations. Many of our deepest beliefs about ourselves, I'm not enough, I always mess things up, people can't be trusted, success requires suffering, were formed early in life and reinforced over time. Once internalized, these beliefs quietly govern decisions, relationships, and goals. The author emphasizes that you do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your identity. If someone identifies as inconsistent, unworthy, or incapable, no amount of external planning will create lasting change. Identity acts as a thermostat. When reality exceeds it, the system adjusts back to what feels congruent. A key insight in this section is that self-sabotage is often loyalty to an outdated identity. For example, if you once survived by being invisible, humble, or self-sacrificing, stepping into confidence and visibility can feel like betrayal. Growth may trigger guilt, fear, or shame, not because it is wrong, but because it conflicts with the role you once needed to play. The book then introduces the concept of cognitive rewiring through conscious thought selection. Thoughts repeated consistently become beliefs. Beliefs reinforced emotionally become identity. The author cautions against superficial affirmations and instead advocates for evidence-based self-belief, proving to yourself through action that a new identity is safe and real. This is where small, aligned actions become powerful. You don't become confident by declaring confidence. You become confident by keeping small promises to yourself. Each completed action sends a message to the subconscious. I am someone who follows through. Over time, these micro-proofs reshape identity more effectively than motivation alone. Another important theme is letting go of comparison. Comparing your progress to others reinforces scarcity and erodes self-trust. The book explains that comparison keeps you focused on external validation instead of internal alignment. Growth becomes sustainable only when success is defined personally, not socially. The author also discusses resistance to change and why it often intensifies right before breakthroughs. When old beliefs begin to dissolve, the mind attempts to restore equilibrium by amplifying doubt or distraction. Understanding this pattern helps readers recognize resistance as a sign of progress, not failure. Part 4 ultimately reframes transformation as an identity upgrade, not a personality overhaul. You are not becoming someone else. You are returning to a more authentic version of yourself, free from inherited fears and outdated beliefs. When identity shifts, behavior follows naturally. The mountain does not need to be fought. It needs to be rewritten. Part 5. Discipline, Change, and Inner Alignment. This section addresses one of the most misunderstood aspects of growth: discipline. The book challenges the traditional idea that discipline is about forcing yourself to act despite resistance. Instead, it presents discipline as a byproduct of alignment. When your internal world is clear, consistent action becomes natural rather than exhausting. The author explains that most people fail at discipline because they are trying to override emotional resistance instead of resolving it. When goals conflict with identity, values, or unresolved fear, the mind creates friction. This friction shows up as procrastination, burnout, or cycles of intense effort followed by collapse. True discipline arises when actions feel emotionally safe and meaningful. A major theme here is emotional regulation. Consistency depends on your ability to tolerate discomfort without escaping it. Growth requires sitting with boredom, uncertainty, and vulnerability. The book emphasizes that motivation is unreliable. Emotional stability is what sustains progress over time. The author introduces the concept of self-alignment before strategy. Productivity systems, routines, and plans only work when they support who you are becoming. Copying someone else's habits without considering your own energy, values, and life season often leads to failure. Sustainable change is personal, not prescriptive. Another important idea is the difference between urgent action and intentional action. Many people stay busy to feel productive, using motion to avoid introspection. The book encourages slowing down enough to choose actions that create long-term stability rather than short-term relief. Progress measured by peace, not pressure, lasts longer. The section also highlights the importance of boundaries in maintaining discipline. Saying no to distractions, misaligned relationships, and unrealistic expectations is a form of self-respect. Without boundaries, energy is constantly leaked, making consistency impossible. Discipline is not about doing more. It's about protecting what matters. The author reframes failure and setbacks as feedback rather than proof of inadequacy. Regression is not a sign of weakness, but a natural part of integration. The key is reflection, not punishment. When setbacks are met with curiosity instead of shame, they become stepping stones rather than stopping points. A powerful insight in this section is that change must be repeated in calm moments, not only in moments of inspiration. The habits that define your life are built in ordinary days, not emotional peaks. Commitment to the mundane is what separates temporary change from lasting transformation. Part 5 also touches on self-compassion as a discipline. Harsh self-criticism creates emotional exhaustion, making consistency harder. Compassion, on the other hand, fosters resilience. When people trust that they won't abandon themselves after mistakes, they are more willing to keep going. This section reinforces a central message of the book. You don't need more motivation. You need more alignment. When your actions reflect your values, your identity supports your goals, and your emotions are acknowledged rather than suppressed, discipline becomes an expression of self-respect. The mountain within begins to feel less like resistance and more like a path forward. Part 6. Surrender, Acceptance, and Inner Peace. This section introduces one of the most counterintuitive but transformative ideas in the book. Lasting change doesn't come from trying harder. It comes from resisting less. After exploring self-sabotage, emotional healing, identity shifts, and discipline, the author explains that the final layer of growth is learning how to stop fighting reality. Many people believe control is strength, but the book argues that control is often fear in a fancy suit. The author defines surrender as the willingness to stop arguing with what is already true. It is not passivity, not quitting, and not whatever happens, happens. Instead, surrender is the decision to drop the internal battle, the constant mental replay of, this shouldn't have happened. I shouldn't feel this. I must fix this immediately. Or, I can't handle uncertainty. The moment you stop resisting reality, your energy stops leaking into stress and becomes available for healing, clarity, and action. A core message here is that acceptance is a release, not an approval. Accepting what happened does not mean it was okay. It means you stop giving it additional power by reliving it daily. Many people stay emotionally trapped not because of the original event, but because of ongoing resistance to it. Replaying the pain, seeking closure from the wrong places, or trying to rewrite history. Acceptance is the point at which you stop demanding a different past and start building a different future. The book also ties surrender to nervous system regulation. Constant resistance keeps the body in fight or flight. Shallow breathing, hypervigilance, overthinking, and emotional reactivity. In this state, even simple decisions feel heavy. Surrender calms the system, allowing you to access higher-level thinking, patience, creativity, perspective, and grounded confidence. The author highlights that people often chase answers while their minds are too activated to receive them. Peace is not a reward after problems are solved. It is a state that helps problems be solved. Another major theme is trusting inner wisdom. The author distinguishes between intuition and anxiety. Intuition feels calm, steady, and clear, even when it says something difficult. Anxiety feels urgent, repetitive, chaotic, and catastrophic. Many people confuse anxiety with instinct, especially if they've lived in survival mode for years. As readers heal emotional patterns, their intuition becomes easier to hear because fear is no longer dominating the signal. This section also challenges attachment to timelines and outcomes. The author explains that fixation creates suffering, not because goals are wrong, but because rigid expectations imply that happiness is conditional. When you believe, I'll be okay only when X happens, you sacrifice peace today for a future moment that may still feel empty when it arrives. Surrender doesn't mean abandoning goals. It means pursuing them without tying your worth to the result. You become committed, not clingy. The book stresses that surrender is often required when facing what cannot be forced: healing, relationships, creativity, confidence, and trust. You can't bully your mind into peace. You can't micromanage your way into love. You can't control others into respecting you. Instead, you build a life that supports peace through boundaries, aligned choices, and emotional honesty. Then let life meet you there. A practical takeaway from this section is learning to pause before reacting. The author encourages readers to replace immediate reaction with observation. What am I feeling? What story am I telling? What is actually true right now? This creates space between stimulus and response, the space where transformation happens. Over time, this practice rewires the default pattern from panic to presence. Part 6 ultimately reframes the mountain as something that softens when met with acceptance. The author suggests that inner peace is not the absence of challenges, but the absence of internal war. When you stop trying to control everything, you stop being controlled by everything. Surrender becomes the final stage of growth, not a collapse, but a return to stability, trust, and emotional freedom. Part 7. Conclusion. Integration and Becoming. The conclusion brings together the book's central message. The mountain was never meant to be conquered, only understood. What once appeared as self-sabotage, fear, or limitation is revealed to be a guide, pointing toward unresolved emotions, outdated beliefs, and misaligned identities that required attention. The author reinforces that transformation is not about adding more to your life, but removing what no longer belongs. Growth happens through subtraction, releasing false identities, emotional armor, survival patterns, and external definitions of success. What remains is clarity, presence, and self-trust. A key takeaway is that healing and becoming are inseparable. You cannot outgrow what you refuse to heal, and you cannot become aligned without facing discomfort. The work described throughout the book is not linear or finite. It is a continuous process of awareness, choice, and recalibration. The conclusion emphasizes integration over intensity. Dramatic breakthroughs fade if they are not grounded in daily practice. Real change shows up quietly, in calmer reactions, clearer boundaries, consistent choices, and a deeper sense of inner stability. The goal is not perfection, but coherence between inner truth and outer action. The author also reframes success as inner freedom rather than external achievement. When self-worth is no longer dependent on validation, productivity, or comparison, life becomes lighter. Ambition can exist without anxiety, and effort can coexist with peace. Another important reminder is that you are not late, broken, or behind. Everyone climbs their mountain in their own time. Progress measured by self-awareness is just as meaningful as visible milestones. Compassion toward yourself accelerates growth more than pressure ever could. The book closes by inviting readers to see themselves not as projects to be fixed, but as systems to be understood. When awareness replaces judgment and responsibility replaces blame, the inner landscape changes naturally. Ultimately, the conclusion affirms that the mountain is not standing in your way. It is showing you the way. By listening, healing, and aligning, you don't just reach the summit, you become the person who no longer needs to climb.